Welcome to the Movie Business Podcast, picking up where Movie Business Book left off. I'm Jason Squire, hosting a wide range of industry talent and executives to answer fundamental questions about the business today. Here we go. And today we're examining sound design with Joe DZUBAN, sound designer and re-recording mixer who has worked his way up in key positions including sound engineer, recordist, dialogue editor, sound effects editor, supervising sound editor, to sound designer and re-recording mixer on over 100 movies, including AQUAMAN and The Lost Kingdom, The Kissing Booth 1, 2, and 3, AQUAMAN, Star Trek Beyond, Conjuring 1 and 2, Fast and the Furious 6 and 7, and Insidious 1 and 2. He's also been nominated for the Golden Reel Award 5 times. Welcome, Joe.
Thanks for having me, Jason.
Well,
it's great being here.
Yeah, it's fun to talk to you about sound. And let me ask the key question. What are the secrets? What are the secrets, Joe?
Well, you know, it's funny. When you asked me that, you gave me these questions ahead of time, and I appreciated that because I do like thinking about the industry and thinking about kind of, you know, my little place, because everybody brings something individually different and the experiences are so varied. But I'd say, you know, if there's a big secret to sound design, when people think of sound design, they think of, you know, footsteps, they think of layering ambience, they think of recording Foley, and that's all part of it. But I think the deeper component, and this is where kind of the craft and the art comes in, is that you have to find ways to use these sounds expressively rather than literally. So everyone thinks of sound, oh, you're the folks that put the sound in sync. You know, they make the sound effects, you put those in sync. So you see a glass down and you put that glass down exactly in sync. But it's really all the stuff that goes on outside and off the screen is that what really shapes the experience for the audience, you know? So I think if there's a secret to sound, it's all the stuff that you don't see is the area that I love to focus on.
Well, you also develop great instincts with sound. There's nothing like actually handling and manipulating the dials for the various subtleties of the different examples of sound that you're controlling, which brings me to a curiosity about defining the jobs of sound designer and also re-recording mixer.
Right. So sound designer is really the person tasked with watching the film and looking for, you basically have to seek the structure of the film, right? You have to seek the structure. You do have to have an idea of really exactly where the story is going. And you essentially map it out, right? And you essentially map the sound to the emotional arcs of the story, right? So a sound designer sometimes is tasked almost as a composer would be, in that they're tasked with making moods and making creative drones and stings and hits and big things that can kind of be moved around and you know, kind of what we talked about earlier, placed on sync, placed on these big moments that have to have sound. But the other half of sound design is figuring out how to build a world and a palette for your movie where then you could either augment emotions or by you taking away and removing sounds, hone in on certain emotions. So a sound designer really is tasked with kind of being almost a second way to getting performances out of characters. It's like a second way of placing emotion for the audience onto events and onto the things that they're seeing. In a lot of ways, they can work as a composer. Maybe they don't necessarily work in melody, but they work in many times tones and ambiences. And then also the sound designer can also be, you know, someone that's basically, you know, for instance, like on an AQUAMAN, you know, where you're tasked with, okay, these 15-foot mechanized metal squids that walk on the land, you know, propel themselves underwater, and then lo and behold, in reel 6, they jump into the air and start flying like a helicopter. So, right. So you're also tasked with what do these sound like, right? So, and that's also where the creative fun begins, because it's like, you know, your first thought is, okay, I see metal, okay, but you know, again, you don't always want to do the literal. I think sometimes we start with the literal, and then by the end of it, we're completely on the opposite spectrum, right? Mm-hmm. But so you know, so sound design is the job of, you know, you can collect different types of sounds and you catalog them, have them in a library. But then it's up to you to basically sit there behind the scenes and manipulate these sounds. We have tools that are, as you said, I'm a gearhead, so I love pushing buttons. I love mangling sounds. I mean, you have to be to do it. You have to be a sound geek at heart to do this job, because so much of it is being like that crazy cook in the kitchen, and you're just throwing everything at it. You're trying things, because and I would say also that was maybe, if there's another secret to sound design, is that it's so much of it comes from cooking, as opposed, or I should say, maybe cooking or baking is the analogy, right? Where you put ingredients in, not really knowing exactly what you need, right? Because it's an exploratory endeavor. And then at the end, you get maybe 2 out of your 20 muffins that you tried are the ones that you actually want to, these are the good ones. Yeah. So now you take that and you kind of learn what you did from that, and the rest maybe goes away or goes into an old folder, and you listen to those sounds later on. But it's always just finding ways to build sounds that are evocative, that are interesting, that obviously work for the picture. Everything from metal squids to rock avalanches and 8-legged beasts. You have to find a way to tell the story with sound. And for me, I think of it as a way to, for me, I'm a moviegoer. I love films and I love movies. So when I'm designing sound, I design it for a big venue, because that's what I loved growing up as a kid. And I asked myself, what can I do to make this a fun experience for the viewer? So that's kind of where sound design is kind of grounded.
Can we turn to the fun of playing with dials as the re-recording mixer?
Oh, yeah. So the re-recording mixer, so once you have all these sounds built, you can sometimes pass it off, and there's phenomenal mixers in town. I mix as well. So sometimes there's a fun component of being able to, mix what you've actually worked on all these months. But basically, so as a re-recording mixer, you have the dialogue has been prepared and cleaned and prepped. The Foley has all been recorded and sunk and prepped and evened out, balanced, what we call pre-dubbed. Same with the backgrounds, same with the sound design. And then now the music is coming in for the first time. And a lot of times you may not have heard the final score, and chances are you haven't. I think this day and age, I think some composers will send in what they call mock-ups that are usually just little stereo tracks, maybe with synth instruments instead of chamber orchestras, so they'll wait to do the recording till the final end. So now you've gotten all these, these nice string ensembles. So the re-recording mixer's job is to take the entire sound palette and crystallize it into a viewing experience. So you basically start with the dial, and it's traditionally it was 3 roles, dialogue, music, and then sound effects. And through the years, with technology and such, advent of computer and disc hard drives and such, it's really a 2-person job now, where dialogue and music will be handled by one person, and then the sound effects will be handled by another person. Wow. And so basically these 2 folks work in tandem, and with a lot of communication between the 2 of them, right? And they basically go through the film slowly. They take a pass on it. So scene by scene, shot by shot, they go through it, get the dialogue at level, get the background settled in. The Foley is usually there to kind of, you use the dialogue as a guidepost when you match the Foley, right? So you want to just kind of put that into a pocket where it doesn't sound too loud or too low against the dialogue to make it sound real. And then the same with the sound effects. And then you start putting in music. And the next thing you know, you're kind of shaping this music, and you're looking for the moments that are going to be more emotionally driven. So maybe you let the music swell there, and you pull back on the effects and the backgrounds to let the music kind of, you feel the music. Then there's other times where you may want to be more active. I always think of mixing. When I'm mixing, I think of active versus passive, right? And it's kind of it's something that needs to be discussed, I always feel, at the head of a mix, because I think what happens sometimes is, I don't know if it's a TV aesthetic or maybe an old radio aesthetic, but here's another secret of sound design. I think people think that our jobs are to balance everything out and just make everything completely uniform and just completely vanilla as possible. And, in radio, as you would know, radio back in the day, you had to match a certain bandwidth to get the transmission to go through. So that's why you had these volume tolerances, and why you had to use compressors and limiters to physically get this transmission over the air. But those days are different now, right? Where it's digital. And so our job is less about keeping things completely vanilla. And for me, it's the fun is knowing when to have those and apply those dynamics. So passive versus active. So when you're watching a movie, let's say you're watching a good Marvel movie. The Marvel folks do this really well. So you've had an hour and a half of big action, big monsters, maybe city destruction, and there's a lot going on. And you're looking at the film and you're watching this, and there's times when you're in on the action and you're going to want to hear that big building crash. You're going to want to hear the big beast land on the ground. You're going to want to hear that, that heroic fist punch through the wall, right? But then at the same time, you can't hear music, and you can't have all cylinders firing at 10 at the same time, right? So what you have to do is you have to craft it in such a way is that you have to lead the audience from passive, what I like to consider passive, to active moments. So in the final end, when the finale comes, and as an audience member, you've been in the action, you've been in the grit, you've been in the city, you've been in the fight, but now you want to take a step back and you want to feel the gravitas, you want to feel the emotion of the moment as a movie. And that's where you swell score, and that's where you swell the music, and that's where you push out the sound effects. So I guess as a recording mixer, you should never be afraid. Those faders are your friends. Up is louder, down is lower. And it was, it's like, if I were to teach a class on sound design, that would almost be like a first exercise. You take a pass on a movie, you take a pass on a scene, and you'd say, okay, now balance everything so that you just hear everything.
Right.
And everything has equal value. Okay, now let's balance this. Let's see what our tolerances are. This time now, once the character is starting to kind of, maybe the character is off kilter and they're trying to kind of gather their bearings. Okay, so what happens if we lose the backgrounds here? We broom the backgrounds, or we lower the Foley so they don't hear everything, so that's kind of where you start the artistry of it, right? Because that's where the performance comes in, that's where the creativity comes in, and that's always the stuff that I look for. I think I don't want to say it's easy balancing a movie out so that it's vanilla, because there are challenges, and you have to use the tools, you have to do it in such a way, and there certainly is a ton of craft in making sure you hear every single word.
Wow.
The dialogue's intelligible. Yeah. But there's also so much craft, and then taking that and then shaping it in a dynamic way that makes it an experience for the viewer.
Wow, that's a great overview of the job and dialogue, music, and effects, and all of that. Let me turn to any lessons learned throughout your career.
Lessons learned, I'd say it's probably stem on the kind of what we're talking about. I think when I was younger, when you first start cutting films, sound-wise, you may not even understand the movie so well, right? You would just kind of, you would just dig in. You would start cutting a scene, you would turn the dialogue off, and you would just start doing it. And certainly that is a way to work. And, sometimes it's, there's certainly a painting analogy that I use for sound, for doing sound. Sometimes early on in a job, sometimes it requires just putting that primer. You're taking the white wall paint and you're priming the place. You're getting it ready. But then there's also the finesse detail that, sometimes you're painting a mosaic and you're doing these little bits and pieces of small detail work that needs to be done. And other times it's impressionistic, general colors and palettes and textures, expressionistic. So I think I used to take a very literal approach to my work, right? And in the end, what I found was, yes, it's less about sync and being literal and more about making an evocative sound and placing it in a good way that says that the audience won't notice it. Wow. And they won't say, oh, that's not even in sync, or wow, that shot's actually 5 frames loose, but somehow it works because that sound itself works.
You see?
So I'd say going from the literal to the more kind of symbolic is what I've learned.
See, that's a really good detail, and that comes from experience as well, and it's a good lesson for students. Do you have some advice for young creatives who want to enter the business?
Yes, definitely. So I think there's 2 things that it was difficult when I got into the business. One, get a laptop and put Pro Tools on it. Pro Tools is your friend. So right now, Pro Tools is what the equivalent was of a Chem or a Steenbeck or a Moviola. I mean, this thing is ubiquitous. So if you're learning to cut sound, Pro Tools is certainly the industry standard. And it's an excellent digital audio workstation. It's an excellent DAW. So you need to know it. You need to have it on your computer, number one. Number two, get a good couple $100 microphone. Zoom now, Sony, they make handheld devices, and there's never been a better time to go out and record sounds with the device because it's all digital now. And you could start your own library, right, which is great. And then B, you could have something so that when a show does come in and you're working on something, you're never at a loss to have a sound effect. You could always go out and record something. So it basically, between having a recorder and having a computer with Pro Tools, at that point, you have no excuses, right? So at that point, you could start, and I would say when we're in school, right? And that's what I would say, someone that's in school, that's coming out into the business, it's a never, as you know, it's a never changing business. And it's certainly the way things have been in the last few years, it's a difficult business right now to get a foot in. But what I would recommend is you have to keep track of your colleagues. If you went to school with folks, keep track of those folks because they're good people that are going to be out and about doing things, and never be shy of being that person that'll raise their hand and say, hey, I'll help you out with sound. Count me in. Because I think that's what it takes to get a foothold in the business. You have to be willing to work on shows and do your best on shows, even though you may look at the filmmaking and say, oh, well, I would have done this better. Or I think if I were in their position, maybe I would do it better. Because I think as people that love film, we're always sometimes, critical of the things we work on and the things we watch. But there's also that difference professionally where when you're tasked with doing sound on something, you have to interpret what the director and the producers want. You have to do the best job that you can for them. And then you'll work on shows sometimes that you may say, oh, well, this is silly, or, oh, this isn't going to do anything for me, or, oh, I just want to be working on this type of movie. And at the end of the day, everything you work on you're going to learn something. And I always say that too. Everything I work on, no matter what show, big or small, no matter who it's for, I always open up myself to say, I know I'm going to learn something on this, whether it be about my workflow, about the aesthetics, about filmmaking, about whatever it is. I think that's the type of feel that you have to bring when you're getting into the business.
See, all that is really good advice, Joe. Thank you. Now let's turn to a wider question of the future. What do you think is going to go on in the future of the business? What's your prognosis?
Well, look, I think everyone's talking about AI. AI is the big discussion. I think AI is a tool, right? It's a tool to be used. I'm not convinced it's going to replace some of these key positions, right? I mean, I think it's going to be utilized. If you look at sound right now, I think the move to digital will be a larger paradigm shift than the move to AI. Because I think when someone makes a movie, it's a humanistic effort, right? It's an effort about people and it's about their lives and it's about us being mortals and it's about the emotions we feel. So out of the gate, I'm not convinced AI is going to be able to make something that we're going to want to watch, right? It may be an interesting exercise, but at the end of the day, we may not even want to watch something that AI makes. But I think it will be used as a tool with sound, for instance. I mean, right now, we basically, when you're cutting a movie, you pretty much it's basically split to dialogue. You have a dialogue supervisor that handles all the production and handles all the ADR. And then you have an effects person that handles all the sound effects, the Foley, the sound design. And then on larger movies, you may have, one or two or three other people that are added on to that crew. So even those are bare bones to begin with. So what AI might do, when the dialogue person is building assemblies or when they pass it off to, say, an assistant to work on, there's still some manual labor that has to happen to get those assemblies up to speed. Mm-hmm. So maybe those assemblies now will be handled by AI. You might have a program that you could load all these recordings in, and then it'll think about it for a day and then give you a track, build you a Pro Tools session that has these tracks already built. So I think it may take away from some of the more manual technical work, but that work will still need to get done and it'll still need to get checked. So you'll still have to have someone that's curating these sounds. And also, sound in itself, when now that everything's digital, so it's all at your fingertips, it's prompt based anyways, which is so close to what AI has become. It's all iterative prompt based. So I think to that extent, I think the future of the business, at least for sound, I think overall the workflow will stay similar to how it is now. Mm-hmm. But I think AI will allow more time for the creative craft to come through.
Very good. Thank you, Joe. Gee, this has been a whirlwind tour of the subtleties of sound
You caught me on a good day.
with the sound guru, Joe DZUBAN, a sound designer, re-recording mixer. Joe, thank you so much for being the guest on the Movie Business Podcast. Thank you.
Absolutely, Jason. Thank you for having me so much.